Hey guys, it's that video I promised you where we are looking at Gunter Gudstudensen and Timmy turns in his first drafts in his papers. And remember, the idea here is for you to first read the document in the Unit 0 folder, which says how you're supposed to write a lab report. Second thing you're supposed to do is mark this paper up. Third thing then is watch this video. So if you're watching the video and you haven't done the other two things, then stop and do it in the order you're told. Otherwise, you're not really getting out of this assignment what you're supposed to get out of it. All right, so if we begin looking at Gunter's paper here, Gunter has a good title. A bad title would be something like Force Lab or Rolling Things Down an Incline, right? It shouldn't just say, what did you do, but what was the lab really about? And so this particular lab was looking at how angle relates to acceleration. Okay, so your lab should not say something like motion lab. That is what I call it on the drive, but that is not a good title for the actual lab report. So it should say a little bit more about like what you actually did. There are only a few mistakes in here, one of which you wouldn't be aware of because you haven't talked about forces yet, but mathematically this M shouldn't be here maybe. But other than that, like this is really a very good theory section. There is some math, right? There's usually supposed to be some amount of math in a theory section, right? And that's good. But better is the fact that where that math comes from is actually explained, right? So you want to have words in your theory section, not just a bunch of math. Okay, so overall, good theory section. Let's go on down and ponder some other pages here. The graphs, these graphs are not a full page, right? So they really ought to be a full page. In fact, the reason why it's only a half page like this is because of limitations of pasting things from Excel. So I couldn't figure out how to make it turn 90 degrees and be a full page. But as far as the graphs go, like they're otherwise well formatted, right? You can see, look, there's the units, the axis has a title, right? Same deal here. Sorry, I didn't mean to cross that out. I meant to underline it because it's good. And then the title of the graph is descriptive, right? It says we are graphing here the acceleration versus the angle or versus theta. He could have also said angle and it would have worked out just fine. But it's a good title and the axes have words and units. It's just not a full page. All right, and then same thing goes for this graph, right? This is a pretty good graph, except for the size thing. It's maybe just barely a little bit too small. Okay. On this page, what you don't see are the questions that Gunter is responding to. So if you had the lab handout, you'd know a little bit more about that. But you can actually read this discussion even not knowing what the questions are that he's responding to, right? You can kind of tell where he's going, right? It kind of flows. And that's how you want your discussion section to be. If we were to flip ahead and look at Timmy's, you probably already saw, oh, he has like number one and then answer, and you don't even really know what he's talking about. So not a good way to respond. On the other hand, Gunter's is complete sentences, thoughtful responses. The only things that we could complain about on this page would be, look, there's a typo right there, and then what are these graphs based off of? He didn't really explain that. Now, what they are, in fact, based off of is some math that Gunter showed in the theory section, but he doesn't really explain that, so that's maybe not ideal. Okay, and probably we could identify some things in the error section that are worthy of criticism, but that's up to you to discover those. Okay, so overall, the grade that you might end up with for Gunter, hold on, I'm finding my sheet here. Grade that we might end up with for Gunter would be for appropriate size of the graphs, they're like just barely not appropriate. Depends how much of a hard-nosed person you want to be here, but for appropriate size, you might put in 0.5. I'm having a hard time writing 0.5 in there. Okay, Or maybe you just want to go ahead and say 0 for that. Totally up to you. There's a range of scorings here that would certainly be okay. I put everything else as being at least satisfactory, so this grade's probably like a 40 or 40 and a half out of 41. Pretty good. All right, Timmy, on the other hand, the first kind of giveaway that Timmy's lab is not going to be that great is how short it is. He really doesn't say an awful lot. And while I will certainly agree that the length of a lab doesn't necessarily tell you anything about its quality, right? I could write a lot and really not say anything. There are definitely a lot of things that are lacking here, and if you don't say anything, your lab's probably not going to get all the points, or even most of them. Bad title. Not a title. Also, what's the date? One of the bits of preliminary information you're supposed to supply is the date on which the lab was conducted. Also, you'll notice that like theta and delta x and stuff, Timmy doesn't put those in there. If you don't know where to find theta and delta in the symbols menu in Office or Google Docs, look around for it, or possibly even Google it, right? You can search for, I don't know, whatever, pick search terms, right? Microsoft Office or Microsoft Word symbols, and you'll find a result that will tell you how to insert those things. It looks just awful when stuff is formatted like this with the word theta in there, or this right here, right? That can be superscripted. If you don't know how to do a superscript, again, talk to me if you've got a chance, or it's actually not that hard to find. It's under the fonts menu, and actually if you've got one of the more recent versions of Word, it's going to be in the ribbon on probably the home screen, or the home tab. So you can find it pretty easily, so do that. And then of course there's assorted typos, right? Again, we can't maybe identify all the things that are wrong with Timmy's report, but formatting is definitely an issue. Another major thing is his theory section just has math and math. There's no explanation of where anything comes from. So a theory section has to have words, not just math. All right, another formatting thing. The tables here are awful. Like this is like right-hand justification, whereas the word sign appears to be left-hand justification, because that's how the default is in Excel. Text is left, numbers are right, but it should all be centered. So he just pasted in from Excel and didn't even look at formatting. There's no lines, right? So it looks bad. So even if everything were right, it would look bad and would risk getting a worse grade, because let's be honest, if it looks terrible, the teacher's going to give it a lower grade, even if it actually isn't all that bad. So you don't want to mess around with that. Make it look good, and odds are it's going to impress, right? Fine. So tables need lines. They also need units, right? Time, and time. That's all going to be seconds, right? Meters for height and distance. There are some calculation errors here, but I'm not going to worry about those, and you probably don't need to either. And of course, the formatting on these graphs stinks, right? You can look through the criteria and then compare it to Gunter's, and you're going to discover that almost everything about this is wrong. All right, discussion section. We already kind of mentioned, there are no complete sentences here. I mean, there are complete sentences, but they don't obviously refer back to anything. Don't obviously answer the question that I asked, right? And that's all. You have to implicitly include the question in your answer, right? So like right here where he says just yes. Yes, what? Maybe you want to talk about that a little more. And also then some clearly incorrect facts, like the wheels of the cart are frictionless. They're good, but they're not actually frictionless. There's always going to be friction. You actually can't completely eliminate it. And then if you're looking at his discussion of error down here. Most of these are not very well thought out responses, right? We need to say a little bit more. Gunter's is very thoughtful, gives a lot of detail, clearly reflects that he actually thought about how much each of these errors was going to affect his results. Timmy, not so much. Okay, that's most of the relevant differences. You probably found some other things that you could have pointed to if you felt like it. So Timmy, the grade I ended up giving Timmy was something like a 24 out of 21 because he messed up a lot of stuff. Maybe you didn't find all of the same errors I found, or maybe you just didn't want to take off that many points. Again, it's a range here, but he certainly doesn't get as good of a grade as Gunter. Probably he has, I don't know, somewhere around a 30. Okay, maybe a little better, maybe a little worse. If you have a 30 out of 41, you shouldn't be like, sweet, I said the same thing Mr. Errico did. That's not how it works. So there's a range of grades here, but the point is you need to evaluate what things he definitely did not do right. For example, crappy title, date of experiment, right? Not having words in the theory section, he's got to lose points there. Not having any sample calculations, right? If you look for them, they're not there. Gunter has them. And then the answers to these questions were more or less just bad. And of course, formatting for the graph was also not good. Okay, I hope that was informative and that it helps you write a good lab report when all is said and done. Thanks very much.